Congressman Mark Walker of North Carolina introduced federal legislation which would allow student athletes to profit from their name and their image.
Yeah, but not everyone is a fan of the proposal. Jared Hill is in our Washington News Bureau with those details.
Just during March Madness, the NCAA brings in nearly $1 billion. From that, colleges with top teams can get millions. A little change for everybody.
Except one group. That's the student athlete.
The NCAA's amateurism rules block student athletes from profiting off of their college sport, but Congress might change that.
You're getting a scholarship, so therefore, why should you make money?
We are saying this is the part that we weigh in because it's restrictive on the rights of Americans.
A new bill would amend the U.S. tax code, making it so that if the NCAA wants to stay tax exempt, it can't substantially restrict a student athlete from using or being reasonably compensated for their name, image, or likeness.
We're not saying they have to go wear their jerseys and do all those kinds of things, but to be able to go back to their towns or to go to some place where they can be able to use that image or likeness to be able to supplement their income.
A lot of kids don't have the talent level to get to the next level, and a bit of opportunity to make some money, save some money.
The proposed legislation is intentionally light on the details, keeping most of the power with the NCAA and the schools.
Hopefully this is a motivation to begin to get this process moving.
Now, this isn't the first time the NCAA and student-athlete compensation has been in the news lately. Of course, last week, a judge ruled that the NCAA can't put a cap on how much education-related compensation a student-athlete can receive. The concern is, though, whether the schools would abuse that. So the judge recommended the NCAA clarify those parameters. And joining us now on the couch are lawyers James Guletta and Jr. and Walter Metzinger from the Stone Pigman law firm. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being here to kind of break this down. What exactly does this ruling mean for students out there?
Sure. So under the current rules, there's a cap. Basically, the NCAA can set a cap on the amount of scholarship aid that each player can receive, each student athlete can receive. And that's set at cost of attendance. Now, what this ruling says is that the NCAA cannot do that. Amateurism is not a justification for setting a cap on education-related expenses. So theoretically, under this new ruling, and the judge suggested certain types of education-related expenses, each school or conference can basically pay players in education-related compensation an unlimited amount. However, the judge was careful to also say that students still can't earn payment that's unrelated to education. So a true pay for play, where a player or a student athlete, like a Zion Williamson, would be earning money based on the value he's helping generate. This ruling does not allow that, but it does allow for a situation, and we'll see how it develops, obviously, where the amount of education-related aid could increase significantly.
So, I mean, just kind of break that down. What is education-related compensation?
So,
what would that mean? And
that's going to be the big question.
Yeah.
But basically, what Judge Wilkins suggested is things like computers, education, post-eligibility scholarships, things that directly tie to a student-athlete being able to perform better in the school. But I think that's a worry of both the player advocates and the NCAA, is that there is some uncertainty as to where that line is going to be drawn, and whether schools are going to abuse this education-related definition to sneak in payments. And that's just something that we're going to have to see develop.
Yeah, a very fine line there. And of
Correct.
course, talking about crossing these lines, we're talking about this because there's a lot of stuff in the news right now. Will Wade, LSU's coach, suspended right now. Let's talk about what this ruling would mean to that particular case.
I'll be glad to try to answer that. In the Will Wade situation, the ruling would not help Will Wade's situation if the evidence that is of concern to LSU and the university involves some kind of compensation to either the player or his parents that is not related to education. So this ruling would not allow for payments that are not education related. And the Wade situation is it's difficult for everyone for the way in which it's come up. It's difficult for Mr. Wade and the way it's come up in another criminal proceeding where he's now been subpoenaed. Difficult for LSU if he still continues to decline to speak to them about the situation, which puts them in a difficult position to avoid doing what they've done, which is dissuspending.
Of course, the Will-Wade situation is ongoing investigation, but let's talk about some of the past investigations. If this ruling does stand true, what does this mean for people who've been litigated in the past? Can you go back and reclaim some of these damages? Or?
Well, that's an interesting question. This particular ruling came up in the context of what's referred to as an injunction, which means that it does not, in and of itself, allow or extend to past compensation or compensation for athletes who have already completed their eligibility. Now, there was, prior to this ruling, a monetary settlement that the NCAA entered into with a player class to distribute funds to compensate players for a period of going back about 4 years who had finished their eligibility and who did not get the benefit of something called the full cost of attendance.
Right.
Because prior to a couple of years ago, colleges were restricted in offering anything more than just the scholarship itself. As a result of the settlement, they were permitted and allowed to compensate players for something called the full cost of attendance, which involved additional incidental expenses, travel expenses perhaps.
Right. And sorry to cut you off, but we are out of time. This is one of those subjects you can talk about and we will probably continue to talk about this in the future, and we'll definitely have you two back. But thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Charles.